Hey Aneka, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good, thank you.
Yeah,
And
good
you?
to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm good as well.
Thank
Yeah. How's
you.
your day been so far?
Um, Various. Yeah, multifaceted. I've kind of, been spinning plates.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. I bet,
Yeah.
especially in this period, like everybody's running around a little bit busy. Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Aneka.
Okay. Okay, so who am I? My name is Aneka Theolade, and what I do is that I teach something called orgasmic meditation, or OM for short, which is a 15-minute partnered practice, in which one partner, who can be a man but also a woman, lightly strokes the clitoris of a female partner, with no goal other than for them to both tune into, sorry, I'm just making sure everything's closed, tune into the connection between the stroker's index finger and the clit, and on sensation as it arises in their bodies. And why do I do that? I discovered that practice 8 years ago, and it was it was mind-boggling why it shifted as many things as it did, why it opened up so much of a world that I always thought to understand but didn't know how to. And so I was like, I want everybody to have it, and I especially want people who look like me to have it. And so that's why I do it.
Right, right, right. So, like, when you look back on your journey before, like, you got to do what you do, what was that process like upon embarking on like this new thing that you wanted to do, and what was like the thought process that you were having to lead you into getting involved in clitoral stimulation for couples, as you call it, on?
Okay. Yeah. So I wouldn't call it clitoral stimulation, though that is involved, but I'll come to that. All
Right.
right. So what was happening for me? So I was in my second marriage, second relationship that led to marriage. And we were 11 years in. And my first marriage broke down at 11 years. And so I had this kind of superstitious, oh, maybe there's an 11-year curse, because, it started to feel kind of routine, and like, we were so used to each other, we weren't really having as much fun, that kind of thing. Though, we've always been really good friends, I'd say. My husband and I, still my husband, thank goodness. So the 11-year curse, be done. Um, so that was kind of happening in the background. I wasn't specifically necessarily looking for something. It was like this is kind of the context in which I was swimming at the time. And I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone. I'd done something called the Landmark Forum about, I think, 2 or 3 years previous to that, and had gotten really involved in that. So I was a bit of a personal development buff, really interested in, how to break the binds of, like, familial patterns that you're not happy with, and that kind of thing. So I was always interested in that kind of thing, and I'd done the Landmark Forum and had met this friend in that work, and he was like, "Oh, I've got to go. I'm going to this OM event." So I was like, "I didn't know you were Buddhist. When did you become Buddhist?" And he was like, "No, no, no. OM as in orgasmic meditation." I already started laughing. I was like, "What's that?" And then he told me, and then I really laughed. And then I was like, "There is no way there are people on this planet who do something like that. Where do I sign up to find out more?" And to put that in context, I started my career as a writer. I've been a journalist for Trinidad Guardian, Trinidad Express. First thing really was curiosity. I'm like, what? People do what as a what kind of practice? Like, I had to go see who these people are and find out what this practice is about. And the next week I went to what at the time they used to have these weekly communication events that gave you a sense of like what an OM is like, which, like when you actually physically get into the nest and practice, you can kind of simulate this through the way that you connect with other people in the room. And I walked into this room, and like it was like walking through treacle. That was the first thing that blew my mind. I was like, why does the room have a texture? It's like I could feel the texture of the room. And then the people who were presenting the evening, they came out, there were these two women. And my first thought was literally like, whatever they're having, I want it, because I want to be like that. Like they were just like really lit up, and they were just like, they came out, it was like, whoom. And, they just, everyone's attention was on them because they were so bright. And it wasn't because they were pretty or anything like that, or because of what they were wearing. It was something that was being generated from the inside, like a light bulb. And it was like, okay, is that what this thing gives you? And so, yeah, the rest was kind of history. I went home, told my husband, I was just like, whatever this thing is, I think we should check it out. still curious though about how it actually worked, in reality. And so he came the next week to the communication games, had a very similar, why does the room have a texture kind of experience. And then we signed up to learn it.
Right, right, yeah, that's very fascinating story, and a lot of people will be interested to know more about orgasmic meditation. But before we talk
Hmm.
further on
Hmm.
I want us to
Hmm.
talk a bit more about like your previous relationships, because you mentioned like there was an 11-year period where like it was kind of problematic for you. Now we've all had
Hmm.
like different struggles when it comes to previous relationships, and we navigate
Hmm.
through those to get to where we are now. So, what would you say some of your previous struggles were in previous relationships, and how did you navigate through it to get to where you are now?
Hmm. Um, let's see. I think, okay, so in terms of like my first marriage, I'd say that I was really more I had less volition around some of my wounds coming out of childhood. Okay. So I'm a woman whose childhood was fairly absent, of my father, right? He wasn't very interested in being involved. His take on it, which I only found out, 10 years ago after my mom died, and he felt free enough to tell me, was that he wasn't ready to have a baby with my mother. They were dating, they weren't married, and then she got pregnant, and he wanted her not to, continue the pregnancy. And she was like, "No, it's my baby. I'm gonna have my baby." And so his punishment for that was like, well, I'll be as involved as I want to be and not as involved as I don't want to be, kind of thing. And so my childhood, like I could literally tell you like at what ages I saw him. But this was a big deal for me because I think, you know, having spent a lot of time reflecting on it now, I was practically like in love with my dad. That kind of like we have a very similar face, and I just kind of wanted his attention, and I didn't understand why he was so leaned out. And so I spent a lot of my childhood in a kind of emotional pain about that, and trying to figure out who to be, to make him love me, kind of thing. And so my first husband, poor thing now, it's so funny because I was such a victim of him for so many years. But now having done so much work, it's like poor thing because he was just like the perfect, like perfect bait for, somebody with that number of issues to work out. And so he was actually quite close to my father in age, so a lot older than me. He'd been married 3 times before. And he had some similar addictions to my father. So my father drank a lot when I was a little girl. He smoked a lot. My first husband did all of these things. And it was like this reenaction of me trying to get an addict to love me. So it's like if I couldn't work it out with my dad, I was gonna work it out in this intimate relationship. So I was literally, repeating patterns. I would say without substantial consciousness and help, it didn't stand a chance in hell, right? It really didn't. It really didn't, because it was like literally, and I guess, for my ex-husband, he was probably playing out a lot of his emotional issues with his mother, because, as it would, if you're looking at puzzle pieces, he'd grown up without his biological mother and had a whole bunch of issues around that. And I'd grown up without my biological father and had a whole and so it was like this emotional match made in, or maybe hell is better than heaven in this context. But yeah. And so that's what that relationship was. And I had kids like really young as a result. Like we had 3 children together. I was 19 when I got pregnant the first time. By the time I was 24, I had 3 children. So it's this kind of really I don't want to say, well, it was dysfunctional and it was toxic. That is true. But it was also like it took my life down a particular trajectory at that point. But I always had this like, I want to go to university. I wanted to become Dr. Aneka of letters. I'm really into books and writing. And I still managed to do some of that, but I hadn't gone to university. And once I did go to university, get my degree, start to do more of the things that I wanted to, I kind of woke up inside of that relationship and was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And so that was the beginning of the end for that one, because it was just not tenable. And I did try, I was like, let's get help. Let's try to figure this out. But he was just like, that stuff is bullshit. I don't want to, yeah, I don't want counseling. I don't want therapy. I don't want, any of that stuff. And so without his participation, it wasn't possible to continue.
Right. You know, like when we look at our childhood, a lot of things that happen at that time do have a significant effect on people as they grow up. And like you was talking about, like the patterns, the things that we couldn't do as a child or something, they get repeated
Mhm.
into adulthood. So you did mention, like once you realized that kind of situation was toxic and not working for you, that when you was in university, you started to wake up to the
Mm,
situation. So
mm,
what really triggered you to wake up and see it for what it was, and how did you start to kind of detach yourself from that situation and actually see that this is not the path that you want going forward?
mm. I think for me, it really, if I had to call it, because I don't talk a lot about this. I have spoken about this stuff like, in like larger interviews about home and that kind of thing. But if I had to say, I would say like getting an education is also a, a kind of consciousness process, right? Because it's like there are things you just don't know and you don't know that you don't know them. And so, you start reading things and discovering things about the world that you never knew, historical, spiritual, whatever. And I was doing a degree in literature. So I got to read very, very widely, across cultures, Native American cultures, all of this is the kind of stuff I like. And so there is a sense too of like the world getting broader. And so my narrow context becoming more clear. It's like, oh, my life is quite narrow compared to this thing that I'm discovering. I'm discovering the world is way bigger than I thought it was. So there was that, but also at the time, um, I was working for a company that kind of was into a kind of personal development. It was the Young People's Health Project, and they sent me on some training because I would work with like young people in GP practices, just very simply like around becoming teenagers, and then also working with their parents because some parents are like, we don't want our kids to know that they're becoming teenagers. This place where people like want to control how much knowledge everyone has, and so I was sent on this training. It's called solution focus, uh, brief solution focus training, right? So I did like 64 hours of this thing, and there was a question in that training. It's called the miracle question, and I was asked for the first time something to the effect of, if I were to wake up tomorrow morning and my life were more in line with the way that I wanted it to be, what would be the first thing that I would notice? And who would be there? And what would they be doing? And it kind of had this whole quality of having me, one, think about, well, what do I want my life to be like? And then also, what would it feel like if I was there? And who did I want in this picture, right? And no one had ever asked me something like that before. And it really, I remember like that moment very, very well. Like I remember the training was in Farringdon because I walked away from that training and I had this thought, like, so then, is it actually possible to have a life that's different to the one that, like, your parents have kind of left for you, kind of thing, And that was, and it's like I was like so kind of enthralled. I know it's to me, even to me, it sounds kind of silly now, but at the time, it was like someone just told me something extraordinary that you were not beholden to the culture, the class, you weren't beholden to your early beginnings in the way that you thought you were. You had the power to visualize something else and to go after it. And I resolved to myself then that I was going to find out how that works. Because even with that question, I mean, that question just opened up the possibility of that, but I had absolutely no clue, and I still feel in many ways I'm pursuing that question, though it's been answered, at various levels. It is a question that I've continued to pursue from that moment. So yeah, I think the two things work together to kind of like pop me out of my limited reality. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So fast forward into orgasmic meditation now. You said it's beyond the clitoral stimulation. So can you walk us through like what is the process of it, like the meditation
Mhm,
part and like how it really
mhm.
works?
Okay, sure. All right. So this is the thing, and this was, I guess, the curiosity because it does sound very much like what people would associate with, say, a sexual act, or when people are like I want to say this well, because what I'm thinking of is like mutual masturbation, but something like that, right? And so what I want to do is kind of maybe give you the philosophical context before the physical one, which is in so many ways the way that this practice works, right? And so even though the genitals are involved, it's not considered sex, right? It is more like meditation than it is sex, in fact. And once you've done it, you kind of realize that very quickly. Because it's like, well, instead of like the breath or the candle, we're substituting, the female clit for the focus. But the idea isn't to get her off. The idea isn't, either person's actual, pleasure in that way. Literally, the focus of it is connection and sensation. All right. And so to go back a little bit, the way that comes to work like as a practice, right? What people discover is that it begins to break down several sort of like paradigmatic ways in which we operate in the world. So you could call it, and I prefer to call it this, though we've taken a much more evolved um direction recently, like talking about, the erotic and eros. But, if we were to park that for a second, you could see it as orgasm, what we used to call orgasm 1.0 and orgasm 2.0. So like an upgrade for your understanding of orgasm. And at orgasm 1.0, you kind of see orgasm as like the climax of an experience, especially a sexual one, right? Like the peak. And it's the way that most people are kind of focused on the peak. And so not just in sex, but in life as well. It's like, you do a 4-year degree, you're trying to get this, master's, and your whole focus is on getting the master's. You kind of miss the experience of like being in the program and the people around you. And, and it's like, and we can spend our whole lives this way, right? Like focused on the when do I get that promotion, and you kind of wake up inside of it. A lot of people talk about this, like, how come I've got all these things but I still feel empty? That would be why. It's kind of like you've been so focused on the pinnacle that you've missed the journey up to there. Okay. And so that's the 1.0 vision. So in the 2.0 vision, it's about everything. And so we talk about it as your ability to give and receive. So it's like you're there in the moment, able to like give of yourself and receive of everything that's going on. And so orgasm shifts from being about, the climax, the pinnacle of an experience, to everything in between, your entire ability to be present for all that's happening. Okay, so that's the first thing. And so you're learning that because, you're either stroking or being stroked in a context that isn't pulling for a climax, right? Climax can happen. That's absolutely fine. Nobody's trying to make something not happen. But the idea is that you're just slowing down enough to feel, both of you, right? So there isn't a question of, well, what's in it for the man? It's a ridiculous question because it's not a pleasure practice in that way. It's not about getting her off. It's not about getting him off. It's about slowing down, both of you slowing down enough and having a point of, something that you have your attention on, right? That keeps the sensation high, but then also trains your attention to stay there. Okay. And so that's the first bit. And in terms of like going from orgasm 1.0 to 2.0, you have like several ways, as I said, of operating in the world that most of us have been conditioned to do. And maybe I'll just touch on two just to give you an idea of what I mean. So like the first one is around personal power. And this is something that interrupts from the very beginning. And this is one of the things that I found really uncanny. It's strange because it would seem very simple, but it's like both people with the practice, both people have to say yes, right? That's normal. We talk about consent in the world all the time. But the notion is that you're in this experience because you want to be in this experience. This is your desire, right? So the way you're coming at how you approach things in life is I'm here because I want to be here, not because I'm doing something for you. And usually, like in the 1.0 version of life, what we do is like to get people to do things for us, we do things for them, create a list of the things we've done for them, and then kind of hold them hostage to doing something, doing stuff back for us, right? Or we do this good person routine, right? Like people can call us and we're like always showing up for them. And so the idea is when we ask them something, they dare not say no because we've been good. We've shown up every time they ask us, right? This turns that on its head. It actually feels really awful if someone says yes to an because they want to make you happy, right? Or they're saying yes to an so that you will get them off later. Very quickly, that kind of transactional way of operating, that kind of commercial sort of perspective inside of interpersonal, intimate relationships begins to feel really ick, right? And I think the world is kind of waking up to that a little bit, this notion that we're constantly trading, right? But Om is like, there is no trade. You're here based on your desire. And once you start, exercising that muscle of what do I want? Do I want to be here? There is a way that begins to grow in your life, and you can begin to feel where you really should be and where you really shouldn't be. You're just there because your mom told you to be there, or some other thing happened that had you think that this is what you need to be doing, but actually it's like we all have a blueprint built out of our desire, and you begin to tune into that literally at the level of the subtlest sensation. And so I shall only do one. So I'll do that one because I think that's one of the biggest ones. Most people are not connected to what they actually want, who they actually are in terms of like their lives and what they're saying yes to. This teaches you where your yes is, where your no is, and what true desire feels like for you. Okay, so that's it on a kind of, and there's more, and you can ask me more if you like, but I just don't want to, because I know we have a limited amount of time,
Right, right, right.
on your podcast, right? So then I'll take you into the physical thing. And so the physical thing, as I said, takes 15 minutes, a little bit more if you include setting out the nest. And what a nest is the place where you will have an om. So you don't om on a bed. The reason for not oming on a bed is because, there's a period of time of making the distinction, between om and sex. This is like a critical part of it in a way. It's like we all would have to go through something like this. Genitals being touched, climax can happen, liquids, of course it's sex, right? And so you have to retrain the brain that this is a meditation. There are certain things in this that are not going to be available that would be available in a sexual encounter. And so we don't do it on a bed, we do it in a nest. The nest has a yoga mat, a blanket, some cushions, gloves, a timer, what we call like an om towel, which sits under the strokey's buttocks to collect any excess, lubricant or, liquids that might occur during the practice. Have I missed anything? A zafu. So a meditation cushion for the stroker. And so this is laid out in a particular way on the floor or any comfortable area, in your home, right? Just not the bed, not a sofa either. Nowhere that you would confuse it as a sexual encounter. And so yeah, so those are your supplies. There's a lubricant as well that is oil-based, not water-based, because you want it to last the entire 15 minutes. Whereas, water-based lubes dry out. And then there are a series of steps that are always the same in every om, right? So it's just like any meditation. It's like the strokey lies on the yoga mat and blanket. She puts her left leg on a set of cushions. On the right, the cushions will go under the stroker's leg, and then her right leg will go over his leg. He steps in a particular way, lowers himself, and then, he does what is called the noticing step. So he puts his hands on her thighs. It's not a massage, it's like the first grounding. So he'll say, I'm going to touch your thighs now, safe porting her that he's going to touch her before he touches her actually. And then he will notice one or two value neutral things about her genitals. And what value neutral means is that it's literally texture, color, position. So nothing like, oh, what a lovely pussy you have, or, I love the way that your genitals twist out. It's nothing like that. It's very much, I notice that there is a line of gray hair down the middle of your labia. I notice your lips are slightly parted. This step is really interesting for women, especially at the beginning, because many of them have never taken a mirror and viewed their own genitals. So it's like viewing it through the eyes of someone else, kind of discover things that you didn't know about it before. And so once he's done that, she'll say thank you. He'll keep a part of his body connected to hers, put on his gloves, apply a lube to his left index finger and right thumb. He's going to stroke with the left. The thumb is going to provide very light grounding just at the entrance to her introitus. He'll start the timer. He will say to her that he's going to touch her genitals. He will do so. And then for the next 13 minutes, he will do a series of upstrokes and downstrokes. He'll start with downstrokes, but literally it only has two directions. There are no circular strokes. There's nothing fancy. And it's literally at the kind of, what is that, pressure, at which you touch your eyelid, right? So it's a very light stroke, right? And she can ask throughout the OM for more pressure, less pressure, more speed, less speed. He could also make offers. Would you like me to move a little to the left, to the right? And the idea is that they're tuning in together to the spot of the highest sensation. And that is not necessarily the spot that will get her off. Sometimes it is, but it is literally the point at which they can feel most connected to each other. And what the science is showing us is that like around 7 minutes, their brain syncs up and they begin to feel very similar sensations, right? Because we now have a lot of science about how OM works, which is great because now we can, we can show people what we've been experiencing for all these years in the nest. At 13 minutes, the first timer will go to signal that there are 2 minutes left in the OM. But he or she, because your stroker can also be a woman. It's not, the strokee has to be a woman. But as I said, the person who's stroking can be of either gender. Um, yeah, that will signal to the stroker that it's time to change direction. They will finish the peak, whatever that peak is, meaning that if it was going up, 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 they'll wait till they can tell it can't go up anymore, and then they'll switch direction. And then the last 2 minutes are always downstrokes. When the bell goes at 15 minutes, no matter what's happening, even if it's climax, whatever, stop stroking. The stroker then does the last grounding pressure, which is to put the left hand over the genitals, right hand, and then press either towards the floor or towards the strokee's head. Then takes out the towel, wipes off any excess lube and liquids, takes off the gloves, helps the strokey to sit up, and they share what's called frames. And frames are snapshots of sensation as felt in the body at some point throughout the OM. And what this does is help both of them integrate the experience, but also begin to build a bridge between the brain and the body. So most of us are not in our body. And this was one of the most profound changes for me. Because they kept saying to me, like, get into your body. And I'm like, where else could I be but my body? This doesn't even make sense. But when I did land more in here, it was like, Jesus, it's like a head on legs, just so much going on up here, and it's remarkably silent now. It's like most of what's happening is in my body. But before I was like racing thoughts and all of that. And so what you're doing is building a bridge so that you can one begin to tell what you're feeling in your body, but also have a new relationship with your body. And then once they've shared frames, they get out, they pack away the nest until next time, and then the OM is over. So
Excellent,
yeah,
excellent.
hopefully that made sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, and the
for
process
sure.
is very interesting. It sounds a bit like a sex magic ritual with like
Mm,
some kind of a poetic communication involved in there. Yeah,
mm.
so that's
Okay, I've never heard anyone describe it like that, but okay,
yeah, yeah, that was
I'll take your
interesting.
word for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, some women like they come out of like a relationship that maybe didn't work for them, right? And
Mhm,
they were very like anxiously attached within this relationship, right?
mm,
So, even if they're interested in something like orgasmic meditation, they don't know how to detach from their previous relationship to really open themselves up sexually with a new partner. So they kind of shut themselves down and they don't know how they're going to really connect in that way. How can they start to reconnect themselves to their sexuality after it's been shut down from maybe a broken relationship so they can experience something like orgasmic meditation?
mm. That's a good question because I mean, in many ways, so much is not possible unless you're willing to try something new, right? And so, in some ways, what you just asked me is like, how can they get into the nest before they get into the nest? And there isn't quite an answer for that. What I can say is that we are getting like really good results with trauma. Okay, so we're finding that because like a lot of healing can happens in mystical states, and gives you like really great repeatable access to a mystical state, that is akin to like taking a dose of psilocybin. People who have trauma are like finding that they can get aroused even though they have like all of this, like, these yeah, we're sticking. They have these stuck memories, almost sort of like bypassing that and allowing them access to their biology in a new way. But of course, you do have to be willing to get into the nest. And I always say to people, like women do come towards me with certain types of trauma. And I'm like, don't try to do it before you feel that like readiness, before you've hit this point in like your recovery, either with therapy, other modalities, right? Where you feel like I'm ready to try something new. So what I would say to anybody who's sort of like so kind of traumatized that, they don't even feel able to like let someone in is like get traditional help. I'm not against traditional help. Do enough work to the point where you're like, right, I'm ready for something new. I'm ready to turn my sex back on. I'm ready to have a new relationship with my body and with men or whatever gender that you are attracted to. And then we'll be here for you. Trust me, we'll be here for you, and I'll teach you everything you need to know about that. But yeah, I would say it's not available until you are available to get into the nest and open up in a way that will then, I mean, the results after that are like on steroids. Like literally, we're finding that you get, in say 6 months of oming, what takes about 5 years of traditional meditation. So it'll be ready for you when you are ready to get there, but get all the help you need before you come to it. Because you don't, as I said earlier, it's you have to be a yes to it. No one is doing it for you, no one is doing it to you. And so until you can say a categorical yes, this is what I want, stay away from it. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Aneka, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, and find out more about what you do?
Okay, so in terms of me, you can go to yourorgasmcoach.net. So that's my website, and it'll have ways to WhatsApp me, send me email, that kind of thing. I'd also point people in the direction of two other resources. One that I actually work for, which is called the Eros platform, and that has a lot of like information on what OM is, courses on OM that you can take yourself, at various levels. It has events that we do every week. So that's the erosplatform.com. And in terms, you can also find the science there, but you can find the science also at the Institute of Om.com. And then, of course, my social. So you can look for Aneka Theolade on Instagram or on Facebook, probably better on Instagram because I kind of keep that more about Om.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. And for the viewers, all of Anika's socials will be in the description, so you can contact her and find out more about what she does. Once again, Anika, thank you so much for coming on. Any final words?
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Any final words before we wrap up?
I think this is something that didn't necessarily come into our conversation, but I think that it's this interesting thing about doing a practice like Om is that, we live very much in a world that is I guess based on very masculine principles, as I think like that climax driven production makes something happen. And orgasmic meditation is very much about rebalancing and bringing back in some of those things that we have forgotten. So like slowing down, connecting, feeling, especially our desire, learning how to communicate that desire and having intimacy from a place like that. And so it's like, if you're someone who's interested in sort of like rebalancing the world and like bringing back some of those feminine principles, this would definitely be something to explore. I think you'd get a lot out of it. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Anika.
Thank you. Bye. See you. Bye.